Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining tonight's webinar, Managing a Successful International Career, with tonight's presenter, Carla Visser. Carla Visser, she's the president and founder of Global Human Resource Solutions, LLC, which provides global career management and human capital consulting services to international companies, business schools, nonprofits, professional associations, as well as international and American executives. Carla has also held executive positions at global communications companies such as AT&T, Nortel Networks, and Verizon Communications in the US and France. Carla holds a master's degree from Rutgers University in adult education and training and development, and also a diploma of French culture and civilization from the University of Paris Sorbonne. In addition, she has a postgraduate certificate in adult career planning from NYU and is a former certified 5 o'clock career coach. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Carla and enjoy the webinar, everybody.
Thank you very much, Macha. I appreciate it. And I thank all of you for attending this webinar this evening. I hope that you will find the information helpful. And so, as Macha said, you know, I have a background, I have an international background. I've lived abroad for many years, and I've worked with international professionals and executives, as well as international students and organizations. And it really is I really love that. It's a real passion of mine, helping individuals succeed in our global economy. And I wanted to kind of review with you the purpose of this seminar. It's to really review the challenges of an international career and to provide you tips on how to manage an international career. And it's really targeted at people seeking international opportunities. So the agenda that I wanted to cover with you is the characteristics of international careers. How do they compare to a domestic career? What are the key ingredients and the keys to success? And then how to manage an international career. And that's to set your goal, develop a plan, execute your plan, network and harness resources, negotiate your offer, manage your assignment, manage your return and reintegration. I'll also discuss a little bit culture shock that's linked to going back and forth to different cultures. Then a reality check about international careers, and then any discussion about any of the points. So how do you manage an international career? The one thing that came to my mind when I was putting this together was carefully, very carefully. There's an art and a science to managing an international career. And, you know, the way that you would look at international careers, they're complex and multifaceted. They're very rich and rewarding, as we all know, otherwise you wouldn't be on this seminar. Often they're high-risk, high-reward situations. You take risks both on a personal and professional level, and there could be high rewards monetarily, professionally, professionally and monetarily. And they can also be stressful on your career as well as on your personal relationships. And they span international organizations, different countries, continents, cultures, language fields, economic and geopolitical realities and trends. And they're double the work. You have to manage the outbound and the inbound. And you have to manage two cultures, the local culture and the foreign culture. And two careers if you're with a partner, which can be quite challenging. And then you also have to manage the culture shock and the reentry culture shock. And they have financial, logistical, tax, legal, administrative, social, and cultural challenges. So, you know, I tried to really think about all different aspects of it. Having had an international career and gone back and forth several times to live, you know, in other countries, you know, this is really based on my experience and, you know, my working with expatriates. So what are the key success factors to managing an international career? Number one, you should have a goal and a plan. You should pursue opportunities internally and externally. You should have supportive relationships, resources, and networks in your personal, local, and foreign environment. And you should have the physical and mental fortitude to navigate the complexity of work permits, taxes, legal, social, cultural, professional differences and challenges. And the best candidates are those who are proactive, who are sensitive to cultural differences, who are flexible, open to change, are risk takers, and who are lifelong learners. Candidates who are knowledgeable about the risks and the rewards, and who are also aware and informed about the complexity of international assignments, and informed about the physical, logistical, career, emotional, and social needs. You know, I have worked with expatriates who were not informed and who really were not the best candidates for the assignments. The company had not done a good job in actually screening the candidates and their families to see if they would be the best candidates for going abroad. And as a result, they really failed at their assignment. And really it wreaked havoc on their career when they returned, you know, to the mother country. So it's really a very, as I said, there's an art and a science to this. So the process, let's go through this process that I feel could bring some sanity to this very complex, you know, process. So first of all, you need to set a professional goal in terms of, number one, starting with your career plan. What is your long-term plan, and how would an international job help you grow and prepare for the future? What are your passion and your dreams? And how can an international career help you, you know, realize those dreams? What are your skills and strengths as well as weaknesses, values, and interests? What is your openness to learning new languages and cultures and meeting new people with different ideas? What is your flexibility, and what's your preferred geography? So you really need to look at yourself and say, well, what are my goals? What am I going to get out of this? What are my dreams? What do I bring to the table? Am I a good candidate in terms of being exposed to new languages, people, and cultures? How flexible am I? And then what you want to do once you've determined that is really to start researching the market and opportunities. So there are different ways of going about this. I've worked with expatriates who've actually set out on their own, and they've done it themselves without the support of a company. They've researched the opportunities, they've set their goals, they've internationalized their resumes, they've actually set up information interviews with companies, starting first with interviewing with them abroad, and then actually coming to the States to meet with the companies here, and even funding their repatriation because they really wanted to come and live in the United States. And so that's a real pioneer to do that. And another way of doing it, of course, is really joining, you know, an organization that's global. Many companies are global, and also to look at international nonprofits, professional business, and nonprofit organizations. And then take a look at the trends to see how you can take advantage of the trends: outsourcing, globalization, localization, delocalization. There are so many global trends going on that you can identify how you can take advantage of them. We have a lot of, for example, in the financial services area, there are a lot of financial companies expanding into China. We also have Chinese companies who are expanding into the United States. So there's a tremendous, because of globalization, there are a lot of different trends impacting different industries. So once you've decided on your geography that you would like to be, or with people, you know, what kind of people you'd like to work for from which countries, take a look at some of the international trade that's going on with that country and the United States, for example, and which companies are going to be impacted by it. And then, you know, see if you can identify a local position at the company or even an international position. Sometimes it's easier to start out locally so they get to know you, they train you, and then you can you know, hopefully there are international opportunities within that company. Then you target the position and function you want. where, with whom, and in what time frame. Identify your financial, logistical, and relocation needs, and then identify the spousal career needs and support. So, I actually did this myself, where I worked for a global company, and I wanted to go overseas to France, and I started calling, networking with directors and VPs, in the targeted country overseas, and sure enough, they had a position that matched my qualifications, and they did telephone interviews with me, and then I actually went overseas to be interviewed by them and was offered a position, within the week that I was there. So, that it was very fortuitous. I'm not going to say it's always going to be that easy, but if you start networking with people directly in the targeted company and the area where you want to work, you can uncover opportunities if it's an area where you bring expertise that they may not have readily available. Some of the dimensions that you want to consider are both intrinsic as well as extrinsic. Intrinsic would be your self-concept, how you handle interpersonal relationships, your languages and cultural knowledge, your prejudice, your belief system, your worldview, your social affiliation and spiritual needs, your education and socioeconomics. And then the extrinsic would be the external factors, such as your career and your spousal or partner career, your family needs, the financial and logistical needs, the administrative, tax, and legal, and then the geopolitical, global trends, global markets, the economics, and immigration policies. So these are all different dimensions you really want to think about and research to really get a holistic view of what the impact, of making a global move, and the impact that it could have on you and your life and your career. And then you want to develop your plan. And I have an acronym which is GORT. Set your goals, set your objectives. You want your objectives to be SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and trackable. You want to then look at the resources that are required, money, manpower, and materials, and then the timetable. Identify a reasonable timetable. Then you want to execute your plan. I think it's important for every professional to really have a marketing toolkit. You want to have an elevator pitch to use during networking. You want to have a 2-minute pitch to get together to use during interviews. You want to have a resume. You want to use a bio for networking. You want to do direct contact emails that should be extremely professional and communicate your value to potential employers. And then, of course, your cover letters. So I consider that part of your marketing toolkit in terms to use to market yourself. And then you want to use a combination of methods to identify opportunities. You could look at job ads. You could contact recruiters. You can directly contact hiring managers through targeted mailings. Also, ways of opportunities are through networking. And you can do this internally or externally. In other words, within your company, if it's a global company, or externally with contacting other companies or organizations. And remember that most of the jobs are not advertised, and we really call that the hidden job market. And networking is usually the way that you can identify the hidden job market. That's exactly how I found the opportunity in France. Nothing was advertised. It was through networking to the hiring manager that I found out that, he had an opening, had not been able to find someone with the qualifications, and that's how I identified that job. So, 2/3 of jobs are obtained through networking and contacting employers directly. So I certainly urge you to consider those techniques for identifying opportunities. Another important thing is to really look at the barriers that will prevent you or help you execute your plan. So identify the positive forces and the negative forces that impact your goals. And with the positive forces, you want to try and maximize those forces. And the negative forces, you really want to try and minimize them or try and eliminate them from pursuing your dream. So, this is also something to make you an educated consumer and a very realistic consumer in terms of really identifying what can keep you from getting this opportunity, what are some obstacles, and what are some pluses in your favor. Then you want to network and harness your resources. So look inside your company if it's a global company. If you work for a global company, I often recommend my clients who want to go overseas to start local and then go global. I also recommend the same thing to my international clients who want to come to the United States, is to start local with a global company, and then after a couple of years, hopefully there'll be opportunities and they can just transfer, because it's much easier with the immigration process to be a transferee than to start from scratch, getting an H-1B and everything else. It's much more complex, much easier, to be a transferee. And then volunteer in international and global organizations. It's a great way to meet international people. Visit the targeted country on a vacation and start networking with people. Join international professional organizations and international cultural organizations. And there are two different techniques called push and pull. A push technique is where you actually contact the employers and hiring managers directly. Pull is where you volunteer for task forces or international projects, and people are attracted to you because of what you've done, and they get to see exactly how you work. One of my clients, that's exactly how she got an opportunity to work in Switzerland. She was on an international task force, and she was working for a very large, very well-known, one of the big 4 consulting firms, and she was on a task force, and she met someone who is head of human resources for a global company based in Switzerland. And based on her experience on the task force, they had offered her a position in Switzerland. This was, I would say, at least 5 years ago, and she's still there. She absolutely loves it there. She's no longer with that company. She moved to another company after a couple of years, but she really loves, loves her experience in Switzerland. So if you can get involved in international projects and task forces, you'll meet people who get to know you, and then you never know what opportunities can arise. And the goal is really to create a network of international professionals. And they are really a precious sounding board and buffer for you in this transition. Then you want to negotiate your offer. If you're with a company, what you want to do is identify your professional needs, position, title, salary, benefits, career development opportunities, re-entry opportunities. This is something really, really critical. If you plan on coming back to the mother country, it's usually not handled very well by companies, and it's probably one of the most challenging aspects of international careers if you're planning to go back to the mother country, because there are just some variables involved in it. You've changed, the company's changed, there's been reorganizations, everything can happen. For example, when I came back from France, my company was going out of business, and I came back to no job basically because they were downsizing tremendously and there were no opportunities, and all the organizations I had worked for were gone. So that's probably the worst case scenario that you can imagine. But the re-entry is really something that you really need to manage. Identify the support services and the resource needs. Negotiate your outbound, in other words, going to the country, and your inbound package. Make sure that everything is covered, such as the transportation, such as if you need to stay in a hotel when you came back, real estate costs involved in finding a place, etc. And identify a mentor in the native country, in your mother country, to help you keep up with changes in your company, so you know how things are changing. I mean, I have had clients who've experienced a similar thing, that while they were here in the United States, their company was actually nationalized, so all of their bosses were gone. So again, worst case scenario. And they came back happily. Some of them did have jobs, but the company was no longer the same company because, it had been nationalized, was no longer a private company. So things happen, as we know, in our economy, and so you want to try and at least keep up with the changes and have some people thinking about you, when you're overseas. And I really recommend that you also get intercultural training services on language, culture, and look at professional opportunities, study them, what are the trends, learn that through professional association, look at what are the macro and microeconomic factors, the geopolitical factors, how will immigration policies impact your plans to go abroad. For example, at a certain point in time, after my expat position was over, I thought of actually staying in the country where I was, but it would have been very challenging because of the immigration policies and the high unemployment in the country, that I was in. So, these are things you need to be aware of. What are, administrative requirements, and then salary, housing, cost of living, and then the tax implications. And as well as what are the international relations between your country and your native country. And request spousal career services and international support services for your children's educational and special needs. So if you're going with a partner overseas, you can, usually with large companies, you should be able to negotiate some kind of career support services. It's not actually offered by a lot of companies. I would say a third of the companies may offer it, but it's something that perhaps if they really want you to go overseas, maybe that's something you can certainly try and negotiate. The packages vary by company, and most global corporations cover health, relocation, housing, transportation, educational, insurance, tax, and legal needs. You should also educate yourself about the tax implications, because when you come back from an international assignment, usually for several years, you have international tax obligations. So you'll be working with the international tax people for a number of years, and you really need to be well educated by them in terms of the tax agreements, how much time you need to spend in the domestic country versus the international country, and the tax implications of that. So that's something you absolutely, in the beginning of an assignment, you really need to be very well educated about that, because it will have ramifications. And then manage your assignment. So you finally get overseas and you're in your assignment, and you really want to learn about the market and the competition and how the company is situated and its challenges. You want to learn about the macro and geopolitical issues and factors. You want to learn about the players in the company, the formal and informal leaders and influencers. You want to see how work is done, what's similar and different with how work is done, the processes, the procedures, the social practices. How do people dress, the formality or the informality, the forms of address and manners. How are the relationships between employee and bosses, the management culture and practices, the labor relations, and what are the best practices. So there's a lot of learning when you go overseas. It's actually quite fascinating. I found that working for a global company in a foreign country, you kind of have an overlay of your company that you know from the United States, let's say, but then there's an overlay of the local culture, and so it can absolutely be fascinating to see the differences. And I had a funny story when I was interviewed for the position in France. The director who interviewed me asked me every single question about my family, if I was married, how many children I had, anything personal that he could think about, he asked me. And of course, in the United States, you're not allowed to ask these questions. And so when my boss in the United States heard about this, he actually called the guy and he said, what's going on here? And I just thought it was the funniest thing, because it's different cultures, different practices. In France, they can ask you all these questions because, in fact, you become like part of the family, and they really like to know everything about you. And so very different relationships between, the employees and their bosses, and how employees are viewed, and the relationships. So you know, it could be a real surprise for you, but different practices in different cultures and different relationships. So these are the things you really need to, you know, be aware of and learn about. And you should solicit advice and feedback, you know, on how to get, what's the best way to get things done. So definitely, you know, partner with local people to get their advice and feedback to be successful. Don't walk in saying, I know it all and I know the best way to do it, because you will fail miserably if you do that. And you want to identify potential mentors and role models in your assignment. You want to look, listen, observe, and learn. Read, research, and reflect. Develop a local network in the country. Join professional business associations. Be aware of culture shock when you arrive. And volunteer for complex assignments. One of the biggest challenges in an international assignment is managing the home country views versus the local realities, and they can totally clash. So if, for example, it's a global assignment, and let's say you report centrally to a global organization that is situated, let's say, in another country. It could be either the United States, or it could be, let's say if it's a Swedish company, it could be reporting to someone in Sweden, the organization, and yet there are the local realities. And the managers in the local country feel that the market is completely different than how the managers view it, you know, in the other country, and you're caught right in the middle because you're there to implement what the other country wants to do. So it can be extremely, extremely challenging, and you really have to be, you know, you have to manage those two different views, and there's a lot of negotiating and compromise that goes on, and sometimes it can be successful and sometimes it's not, unfortunately. And again, you want to maintain your network in the returning country. You want to keep up to date on what's going on in your field, your function, and your company in the new country where you are, as well as in the old country. And also, as we've all recently learned, you have to be aware of U.S. domestic and global developments and always register with the U.S. Embassy. You know, it's just a real tragedy what happened in Libya last week, and because of something domestically that took place in the United States. So you definitely need to be aware of what's going on in your country and how it can impact your assignment, you know, your foreign assignment. It's very, very important. And then you want to manage your reentry. So 6 months or a year before you return, you want to start networking back to your country, working with your mentor and colleagues. And you want to identify an appropriate assignment. You want to plan your repatriation and logistics. You want to handle all of the administrative, tax, legal, housing, and educational needs. Going back, you should definitely request spousal career support. Again, I would say about a third of the larger companies will provide that, you know, for you. You want to join international organizations to continue your multicultural experience, and then you want to really apply the best practices that you've learned, because usually if you have an international assignment, you're really exposed to new ways of doing things, and while you may bring some best practices from the United States to these other countries, you may also be learning some very innovative ways of doing things that you'll be able to bring back, you know, to your country when you go back home. And that probably is the most interesting part about an international assignment, because usually you really have an opportunity to do a lot more things than you get to do in your domestic country. So it's a growth opportunity from a professional development standpoint. And again, you want to maintain the contacts from your assignment overseas, and you want to continue your multicultural journey. So, for example, I have often contacts with the people I worked with. They email me when I go back to visit. I see them. I keep up to date on what's happening. And it's a whole other dimension to your personal and professional life. It's really very exciting and a lot of fun. Then you want to manage your reentry. So research has shown that international relocations and expatriations can impact personal relationships, can increase tensions that haven't been resolved. they can lead to affairs, separations, and divorces, and it can be very difficult for returning employees to integrate in old companies. So 50% of the people who return from international assignments leave their old company when they get back, I'd say within a year, because they no longer fit in. They have grown, they have learned, they have been able to do things that they were not able to do in the local company, and they just can't find their place when they come back to their company. So, you know, unfortunately, because you grow and learn, and you come back to a company where there may be changes also that have gone on in the company, so sometimes there's just not a good fit when you come back. And not all companies really manage the re-entry very well. I could maybe put on one hand, and not even, the companies who really do an excellent job in taking care of their expatriates and their re-entry back to the country, in terms of assigning them mentors, in terms of helping them with that transition. So be aware of the culture shock upon the arrival and the re-entry shock when you return. So I wanted to talk a little bit about culture shock. And if you've worked abroad, you probably are very well aware of this. So it's really an anxiety that happens when you move to a completely new environment. And it can be expressed by a lack of direction, not knowing what to do, or how to do things in a new environment, not knowing exactly what's appropriate or inappropriate. And it usually sets in after the first few weeks when you come to a new place. And some of the, I have a list of the symptoms here, and they really vary by individuals. It really depends on how familiar you are with the culture and with the country. It depends about the support that you have in the environment that you're in. So there are a lot of different, your emotional state, your health, the state of your health. So it totally depends on the person. Not everyone is going to experience, all of these symptoms. It really varies by individual. And there are 5 stages of culture shock. And the first stage is really the incubation, where you feel euphoric. You're so excited. It's the honeymoon stage. You get there, you go, I made it, how exciting. And you see things through rose glasses. And then the second stage is when you start encountering some difficulties, in daily life, communication difficulties, different ways of doing things. Everything takes more time. It's very frustrating to you, and you may have feelings of dissatisfaction. In the third stage, you're starting to understand this new culture, and you're starting to feel like, well, I'm getting a feeling that I can really get things done here, and you're starting to enjoy it, and you feel more balanced from a psychological standpoint. You're getting more familiar with the, environment. And the fourth stage is where it's kind of like you realize the good and the bad about the new culture. And then the fifth stage is when you come back to your country of origin. And you can find that so many things have changed, because guess what? You've changed. You're no longer the same person. And, the country can change culturally. Your company can change due to, lots of, companies change very quickly themselves due to the economy. I remember when I had lived abroad for a number of years, and I came back to the United States, and I must have been out of the country for 7, 8 years. And when I read, the International Herald Tribune very frequently. I got Time magazine every week, and I came back at least once a year for visits, long visits. And so I really felt like, I was keeping up with what was going on in the United States. I read books. I really thought I was keeping up. And when I came back finally, I called it the Rip Van Winkle effect, because people would talk about TV shows that I never even knew about, and so because media and television plays a big role in our culture, and so people would mention, these programs that I had never heard about, and I call it the Rip Van Winkle effect. To this day, people will talk about something, and it was during the period I was out of the country, and I'm just not familiar with it. I can't really relate to it. So these are the kinds of things that can happen when you come back. And everybody, has a different way of reacting to the different stages of culture shock. And, you may pick up new customs that you really like in the old culture, and you're going to miss them when you come back to the new culture. Again, people experience culture shock differently, and so that's not to say one person's reaction is going to be the same. But one of the things that I know is very challenging is you've experienced, an incredible situation with many exciting and learning situations, and sometimes you don't have people to discuss it with because they can't understand what you've been through, and that can be extremely frustrating. And so, one of the things you really want to do is join a group, main contact with your ethnic group, for example, so you have a feeling of belonging and continuity. And when you get over, for example, to a different culture, you want to develop a hobby. You get to meet people through the hobby. Be patient with yourself. Be constructive. Don't be negative when you find situations you don't understand. Be easy on yourself. Do physical activity that will help you, feel better about yourself and to combat sadness or loneliness. Relaxation and meditation are very positive when you're going through periods of stress. As I said, maintain contact with your ethnic group, and it could be either religious group or it could be nationality. So there are in many places American clubs and political organizations, Democrats and Republicans abroad, and that could help you, get used to, the new culture in addition to meeting local people. Engage, with the new culture. Try and learn the language, customs, and culture. And volunteer in community activities. Join professional associations. Pay attention to relationships with your family at work, and at work to provide support. Establish goals and evaluate your progress. Find ways to live with things that don't satisfy you 100%. Maintain confidence in yourself. Focus on your plans, build towards the future. And if you really feel stressed, don't hesitate to get help with a social worker, a therapist, or a psychologist. And, I also wanted to mention that reality check, it's not simple to find an international position. It can take longer than a domestic one. And if you are an experienced professional with specialized expertise, you're probably better positioned than a generalist. And in certain industries, the companies are using fewer expats due to the expense, and they're using more locals. And the job search is different, so you need to be aware of the legal and cultural differences, how to find opportunities, the resumes and formats, that are appropriate. For example, in France, they want pictures on your resume. How, the interviewing process, which is also different. The legal parameters, the work environment, the culture, and the boss and employee relationships. And having an international experience as a volunteer or tourist can really help. And Masha will be able to tell you some of the resources that are available through Exec to help you internationalize your resumes and cover letters. Masha, do you want to take a minute?
Yes, of course. So thank you so much, and I'll just pop in here. So yes, we actually have, and we'll send this in the follow-up email as well, but on Exec, if you go to ivexec.com/resume, you'll be able to see we have resume writers also with an international experience to be able to reach out to them and to see how they can help you. We also have had a webinar as well about international resumes. So there's a full webinar. We'll include the link to that on in the follow-up email. It's a pretty long link, but if you go to blog.ivexec.com and then just type into the search box international resume, you'll probably be able to see the webinar as well. And this was given by a Exec resume writer, an hour worth of content. So those are two great resources that we'll send the links to in the follow-up email.
Thank you, Matcha. So basically, that's it in a nutshell. It's a big nutshell, and I hope that this has been somewhat helpful. I wanted to provide realistic information and not, so that you're aware of the implications. People, who've been abroad probably are aware of a lot of this information, and I look forward to any questions that you may have. And if you have any further information you would like to receive, you have my contact information on the last slide.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you so much, Carla.
So I just want to, actually, Macho, I just want to tell the information for the recording. So again, I'm at Global Human Resource Solutions, LLC. My website is www.ghrsonline.com, and I can be reached at 917-415-6840. And I look forward to hearing from you.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you so much. This was definitely a lot of good information that I'm sure everybody enjoyed as well. So thank you so much, Carla, for sharing your thoughts and your expertise with us.
Are there any questions that people may have?
Yes. So we actually now, so we're going to go through the questions people sent in. And if you do have any questions as well, send them right in as well. So one of the questions, for example, is, are there any resources available to overcome or work with the barriers that you mentioned earlier?
Are there any resources? Well, the barriers will really depend on you. So let's say one of the barriers could be, so it really is very individualized, right? It's not like there's a common set of barriers. It really depends on the person. But let's say you don't know the language and you're going to, a country. So the resources would be, Rosetta Stone would be however you can learn the language, for example. It really depends what the barrier is, right? So let's say a barrier is, I work for a company that's not global, right? So how would you overcome that barrier? You would start joining international organizations. You would start looking at global companies and seeing what opportunities there are, either on a global basis, international basis, or a local basis. Because if you work for an international company and you start local, you'll have an opportunity to transfer, for example. So, it depends on you. I don't know. Every situation is different.
Got it. That's definitely a good answer. And we also have another question. What countries are most active now in hiring expats?
I would say at this point, China. No, I was going to say, yeah, Asia. The financial service markets are growing in Asia, and so a lot of financial service companies may be downsizing in the United States, but they're really looking for people to place in China. Also, high-tech. A lot of high-tech companies are overseas. For example, if you go on IBM's website, it's amazing how many jobs they have overseas. So high-tech and financial services definitely come to mind, because these are jobs that can be exportable. Health services, no. For example, health service is usually local. Legal is usually local, although, there are some there are definitely international law firms, but those are two that definitely come to mind.
Got it. Great. Another question that came in: what are the professional international organizations versus cultural ones available? I mean, it's actually specifically in New York, but also in general, that are for senior execs versus middle managers.
That are for senior execs, international organizations. I'd have to. I don't know the exact answer to that. I know if you Googled it, you would find it. There must be. I'm sure there must be. And again, if you are a professional in a particular field, most of the major professions have professional organizations that have an international counterpart. And I would certainly urge you to get involved with your professional organization, which would give you access to the international counterpart in countries around the world where you could network with executives who are overseas. It's the most natural way to develop an international network with senior level executives. So that's definitely one way of doing it.
Great. Another actually question came in. How would you make it into a positive and handle a bad situation so it still ends up win-win? For example, specifically a major disappointment in what was stated prior to the start of the assignment and when you actually started it.
Wait, say that again. What was it? Excuse me.
So how would you put a positive spin on on a bad situation that basically there was disappointment at the when the assignment was stated versus when you got there. So I guess there was the picture was much rosier than what actually happened when you got there on the ground. How would you make it into positive or give it a positive spin?
In terms of relating it to when you came back, when describing the assignment? Is that what you said? So, all right, so let's face it, a job is never as it's described anywhere, no matter where it is. And it's really up to the person to really create their job, whether they're here in the United States or whether they're in another country. So let's say you thought it was going to consist of certain things and those things did not seem to be happening. Well, it's really, I would advise anybody, whether in the United States or abroad, to really start out, where the job is and then take it to where you want it to be over time. So you first always have to establish credibility in an organization before you can really expand your role to what you'd like it to be. But you always want to talk positively about any work that you have done. You never want to talk negatively about any assignment wherever you are, because that reflects on you and not the company. And the fact that you have gone overseas and worked overseas, already is something, makes you already somebody very, very special, and you should never forget that, because you've taken the risk of doing that. And so, you should certainly focus on all the things you learned, going overseas, and the international thing, and the things that you did there, and say that it was a real learning experience, and that has you always want to put a positive spin on it.
Great. That's a great answer. So we have a question. Is there any particular field that is easier to get into in an international career? For example, is it marketing, finance, or strategy? Is there anything that lends itself to be easier to get into?
Okay, I would say marketing, definitely. Absolutely. I think marketing's a really that could be, definitely. It's transnational and international. Finance depends exactly what kind of role. The financial world, if you're somebody well-versed in all the regulations and compliance that exists in the different countries, and the different practices, financial practices that are used, because we have standards, global standards that are used, nowadays. So if you're familiar with those areas, certainly, but I would think it might be more restricted than, let's say, marketing. Software development is definitely international, because if you know certain languages and they're used globally, there's no question about it. High tech, definitely. So software development, training and development, marketing, training and development, software development, those are definitely areas that I feel would, and finance, definitely possibilities in terms of all the global regulations that are happening now. So those are some possibilities.
Great. We definitely have great questions ahead as well. So I'll try to pronounce your name, but if I mispronounce it, please forgive me. Per asked, are expat assignments becoming less common due to cost?
Excuse me, are they becoming less common?
Correct, due to costs.
Yes, they are. Yes. Again, one thing you should be aware of is that companies are, if companies, American companies, are hiring people overseas, the one thing you have to check is, will you be paid on a U.S. scale or will you be paid on a local scale? Because sometimes it will be considered a local assignment. You need to be very aware of this. And then you'll be paid locally, and you may not have expatriate benefits or very limited expatriate benefits. So that's something you really need to qualify when it comes to international assignments, because they're really trying to, in certain cases, they really want to try and lower their costs by going to certain countries where the cost may be lower, and so they don't want to front load it up with all of these expenses, so they may pay a lower salary and not give you all the benefits. But there may be minimal things you could negotiate, such as paying for your move there and your move back, for example. But you may not be able to get a full benefit package with everything. So every situation is different. You have to know about that. Depends on the size of the company and the industry.
Great, great. I think that actually answered one of the questions we had waiting as well, so that's great. Sabrina asked, I am going to an international conference in UAE, and I am graduating in this coming spring, so I really want to sell myself in an international market. What will be the best way to start an elevator pitch?
So you really want to introduce yourself. You want to summarize your background. It should be, an elevator pitch is meant to be done in 30 seconds or less. It's when you meet people and they say, hi, tell me about yourself. But you want to do it very quickly when you meet them in a meeting or something. So you want to introduce yourself, your name. You want to talk very briefly about, I have a background in XYZ, and I'm looking for to work in this area. And then I would appreciate any suggestions or advice you may have about my career plans. You never ask people for a job. Never. That's a no-no in networking. Never. So you want to establish relationships with people. And then as they get to know you, then, part of their advice might be recommendations on people to contact. But you need to know what you want to do. You need to know where you want to work and which companies and what kind of job. You can't ask people to do that for you. Okay? And if you've done your research, then you can introduce yourself, describe your background in one sentence and what you're looking for in another sentence, and you appreciate their advice and suggestions on your career plans.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. Anand asked, do you target the local hiring manager or the U.S. head office for securing the overseas assignment?
I would target the hiring manager. So if you work for an international company, I would look at your branches overseas and start networking with people. You should know what kind of assignment you're looking for in which department, and start networking with the people overseas, and that's a phone call during the time you're at work, or you may have to stay later or do it from home, and start giving them your pitch, your 3-minute pitch on what you're looking for. And people will refer you to the hiring manager, and that's how you can uncover opportunities. You want to go through the hiring manager. You don't want to go through HR. HR just processes paperwork. You want to go to the person who's looking for an international resource.
Great, great. Another question we have is, what if you worked in the past in smaller companies? How do you make the switch abroad if you don't have the backing of a big company?
Well, as I said in my presentation, there are a couple of choices, and one is that you can join international associations in your field to start making international connections and get involved in the boards, of the associations, on task forces of the associations to meet people internationally. The other thing is to work for a global company. So change look for a job at a global company that has opportunities overseas. So those are two ways that I would think would be the best way to make that transition.
Great, great. We have time for maybe one or two more questions. So I'm going to go with a question that was sent in earlier, but if you do have another question for Carla, please let us know in the next minute or two that we have left. So a question came in earlier. Should you use online websites such as LinkedIn to find people in the chosen country you're looking to move to?
Totally. Absolutely, you should use social media. Totally. Absolutely. You really want to network with people overseas. LinkedIn is international. And again, if you know the area you want to work in and the company, you know, target people, search for people who work for those companies in those countries. And actually, you can even set up your profile in another language. And that's a great way to start networking with people, you know, in other countries. But I would definitely use LinkedIn. It's a wonderful, wonderful resource.
Great. Thank you. So we're just going to do closing remarks, but I just wanted to thank you, Carla, once again for taking the time tonight, for sharing your knowledge with us. This was definitely very enjoyable, and we had really great questions as well, so thank you, the audience, as well.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure for me, and I wish all of you success in, you know, in managing your international career. It is so much fun. It's a challenge, but it's so much fun. So I really wish you the best of luck.